Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tevach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it is dedicated in honor and in memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Shalom. It's also on schus and merit of Rav Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz, L'Eirich Yomim V'Shalom Tevis, for many long, healthy years. So we began chapter 13, the second chapter in the saga of the Beinani. Remember, chapter 10 was about the Tzaddik, chapter 11 about the Rasha, and chapter 12 began about the Beinani. So in the beginning of chapter 13, after explaining the very personality and you can say the makeup, the DNA of the Beinani in chapter 12, which is the paradox that on one hand the Beinani's faculties of the divine soul and animal soul are both active. On the other hand, the divine soul controls the garments. So for all practical purposes, the governance of the Irktana, the small city, which is the human body, and its faculty and its behavior, basically in thought, speech, and action, are controlled by the divine soul. So with that, Alter Rebbe continues in chapter 13, and let's sum up what we learned. B'zeh yuvan, with this we'll understand the Maimer Razal that says that B'beinim zeh v'zeh sheftan, that the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara both are like a shefet. It doesn't say Moshlan. It doesn't say Moshel is control, reigns, rules. Shefet is a judge. A judge doesn't rule. A judge states his opinion. So the divine soul states its opinion. The animal soul states its opinion. So you have now two dayanim, two judges, two sheftim, each one stating their opinion. And then comes the third judge, the Eibishter, ki yamed limin evyan leishia misheftei nafshe. He stands in support of the shefet, the first one, the divine soul. So you have two against one, is machriya. He determines, and that is what allows the Beinani to control the city. So in other words, when you allow the divine soul to speak, that's our job. That's what the power of a human being, that we have the ability to do that. As we learned in chapter 12, the power of Moich Shal Tal Lev, self-control, that has a natural dominance over the impulsive heart, like light naturally dispels darkness. So when a person exercises that as much as he can, so then the Eibishter comes in to support that. And we discussed why you need both elements. And it goes in both directions. First of all, the Eibishter blesses us with that power of self-control. And the other way around, when we use that self-control, the Eibishter comes to support it, and there you have the power to dominate over the animal soul. The Rebbe explains in his gloss, in his commentary on Tanya, and we summed that up as well, that why doesn't he bring Moich Shal Tal Lev here in chapter 13? He only brings the second half, the natural dominance of light over darkness. So he says, because there in chapter 12, he's talking with his additional power of Moichin, the godless, of the Moichin that davening offers. And there's, after davening, some residue, some remnant, some trace of that remains, and therefore you have that power. Here he's talking in all scenarios. Even a scenario where you don't have the davening, and the mind therefore may not be that clear. When the mind is clear, it's definitely going to dominate over the heart, and the impulsive heart of the animal soul. But when the mind is not so clear, then you need that, even the additional power of Hashem that stands, the Yamed Limin, like he says. Which is machriya by name, aloch kedivra machriya. So the same thing he says, that Just reading the Lashon here. So halacha kedivri machri hu HaKadosh Baruch Hu eizrei la yetzer teiv. That's the Eibishter that helps and supports the yetzer teiv, but it supports it. It means the yetzer teiv and the person has to do his part. It's not the Eibishter, because then if the Eibishter is the one that does the part, first of all, that's not the kavanah. Second of all, we have a battle going on. And here we want the person to make the choice. The Beini is due to his work. It's not just God is doing the work for him. But then there's the HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ezrei, Mal HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ezrei, Va'ezed hi ha'ara, and that support, that itself is the reflection that Meir Eir Hashem al Nefesh Alikis, the divine light shines on his Nefesh Alikis, so you should have that natural Yisra V'Shlita al Sichus Achsil V'Yetzer HaTev Ki Yisrael Min HaCheshach, to give him that control, like the control of light over darkness. So we must have the human effort. Then you have that additional support. And that's what we learned in last week's class. But that's still the side of the nefesh, of the Beinoni, as he's in control with God's help. But now the Alter Rebbe is going to come back and now beginning to answer the questions that were asked in chapter 1 in Tanya. So just let's refresh our memory what the question was. There he brought a stir. The Alter Rebbe brought a contradiction. Here it says that even if the whole world tells you that you're a tzaddik, you should not believe them. You should see yourself like a Rasha. But then the Mishnah says a person should never see themselves like a Rasha. Additional question is when you see yourself like a Rasha, it'll depress you. So now he's going to focus on the first part of that question. The second part is going to be later in chapter 31 and chapter 34. So let's read on now in Tanya. However, we just discussed the first half, that the Beinoni has control over his machshava dibra ma'aser, due to the fact that the Yetzer Hara is only a shefet. It states its opinion, but the actual governance goes according to the other two opinions, the divine soul with the support of the Eir Hashem, in both directions, as I said. The Eir Hashem that gives power to the Nefesh Alikis, to the Yetzer Tov, and also the power that when the Yetzer Tov when the person exercises his control, his self-control, the Eibishter helps him to make sure to prevail. Which makes sense, because when you have two kings fighting over the city, and they both have equal say, so to speak, so in addition to all the other strengths we have, you also have the Eibishter now also supporting the divine soul. But now, however, Ma'achar shara shebechol hasmali bebein hu betokfe kitel dosei. Since the negative energy, the Ra, the left chamber of the Beinoni's heart, hu betokfe kitel dosei, retains its innate strength, like we said in the earlier chapter 12. That Mehusev Atzmusev, the Nefesh Abamis, was not in any way shifted. It's there. The enemy king exists. He was not obliterated. He wasn't annihilated. And he definitely wasn't transformed as it was in a tzaddik, as it is in a tzaddik. So, is betokve b'kiltel dose, as he was from the beginning. What the Beinoni has is control over the governance, over thought, speech, and action. So since it's betokve kitel dose, and what is it doing when it's betokve? When it retains its innate intensity or strength. Li'saivus taiva l'chol tainuga elam haza, to desire and be tempted to desire all the different worldly pleasures, because the animal soul is alive. Is battled and its negativity or its evil or its selfishness has not been voided or diluted due to an overwhelming power of good. Like we learned earlier in chapter 10 about a tzaddik. That by a tzaddik, the bittul, the different levels of tzaddikim. And it's all dependent how much, like 1 in 60 or 1 in 100 and so on. So it's completely diluted. In the Beini, that's not the case. The animal soul has its say. It just doesn't have control and governance. It's only a kashefet, but it still has its say. And furthermore, not only was it not diluted, it was not in any way displaced at all. Even temporarily during prayer, that's a temporary state that, so to speak, subdues or puts to sleep the animal soul, but it was not displaced at all. During davening, is displaced for that temporary time, as we learned in chapter 12. So then what is a Beinoni? He's just summing up again. Rak she'ein loi shlita o memshala. Remember, Meishlon. It's not a Meishel, it's a Shefet. Rather, it does not have and lacks Shlita memshal, control and dominance. Lispashit be'evri aguf. To spread over the body's parts. Meaning over the entire human being, whether it's the arms or the legs or the eyes or the ears, which is the Iktana, the small city and its faculties. Why? Doesn't have that power to control or dominate. Mipnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hu ha'emed liyamin evyen, ve'ezeru meir lenefesh alikis, like we learned earlier. Because the Eibishter, God, stands on the right hand of the poor person, as the Pasuk says, and assists Ezra by illuminating his divine soul. So he has a divine soul, and it's illuminating, and that gives him the power to not allow this animal soul to act or speak or think according to its temptation, even though the temptation is there. And we actually know there's inadvertent thoughts that we learned in chapter 12. He controls the governance. He controls the person. The divine soul controls the person with the help of Hashem. But, like we just said, the Ra, the very force, the very voice has not been changed. And that tzaddik has been eliminated, or either completely transformed, or mostly transformed, as we learned. But by the Beinoni, it's active. And if he lets down his guard, God forbid, he'll be a Roshi, he won't be a Beinoni, as we learned. The reason he's a Beinoni because he has total control and he's continuously vigilant. But he shouldn't have, so now he's going to explain. And that's why L'chein nikra kirosha. And that's what the Maimar Chazal is saying, that you should see yourself kirosha. He's going to explain what that means. But that's why he's a kirosha. Since he's on the level of the faculties, he's like a rosha. Though on the level of the garments, machshava dibur ma'aseh, is like a tzaddik, so he's kirosha. He's referred by the Talmud like a rosha. And you see here the unbelievable precise diuk of a Maimar Chazal, kirosha. K'Maimar Chazal, afilu kol ha'olam kulei emer l'cha tzaddik ata. And now he brings the Maimar Chazal from the beginning that he quoted in the beginning of Tanya. The teaching of our sages, that even if the entire world, even if the entire world tells you you're a tzaddik, you should consider yourself and see yourself like a Rasha. Kid Rasha. V'loi Rasha mamish. Alter Rebbe adds. Not an actual Rasha, because if he's an actual Rasha, he's not a Beinoni. And we know a Beinoni is not a Rasha even for 1 second, like we learned. But Kid Rasha, because the power, the faculty of the animal soul is active. Elo, so what is the Chazal saying? That's why it says kirosha. That you should consider yourself to be like a rosha, which means a beinani, in regard to your faculties. Now this is, when you really start thinking about it, you realize so much about the depth and the power of Tanya. As we learned in chapter 1, that we're not looking at people based purely on behavior, meaning how they act, how they speak, how they think. That's absolutely vital, maiso iker. But there's a lot more going on here. Remember, a person would not think, speak, or act in a negative way if they did not have faculties that drove them there. A neshama in Gan Eden, for example, is not capable of doing an aveda. It's not capable of thinking, speaking, or acting in any negative way. So even though we look at people and we measure things based on action, or based on expression, whether it's expression in thought, expression in speech, or expression in action, but the key is what we want to do is work on who we are. What brings that? What causes a person to have a negative thought, or for that matter, a positive thought? That's the nefesh elikis and nefesh abamis. To go back to the beginning of Tanya, when he started explaining first how it is by the divine soul, in chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the faculties of the divine soul, and the garments, the expression of the divine soul, and then in chapters 6, 7, and 8, about the personality and the faculties and the garments of the divine, of the animal soul. Zalumazeh. So what's the point? The garments are just garments. But if you don't have an animal soul, the garments will not go in the direction that is inappropriate. So Alter Rebbe is not just concerned that we should take care of our thought, speech, and action. That's critical. That's what a beinani is. But there's another thing a beinani needs to keep in mind. He needs to be vigilant. Because the thought, speech, and action is controlled by what happens, by who is it being controlled by. And you have to make sure that the divine soul is always in control. That's why he has to see himself kirosha, like a beinani. And recognize that though that you're in control and you get the credit for that and so on, but never let down your guard. And that's what the Chazal is telling us. V'loi lahaymin la'ilam. It says, al, even kol la'ilam kule emel tzadikata, v'loi lahaymin la'ilam she'emrim. Do not believe to the opinion of those that are saying to you. Like the lashon is kol elam kule, means everyone is telling you that. Do not believe. What are they telling you? Now he's going to explain that you're like a tzaddik. He says, no. What does it mean? When they mean by tzaddik, again, is not just the expression of a tzaddik, the personality of a tzaddik. That what? Like we learned in chapter 10. That the rasha boy, the negative, the evil within him, has been voided and nullified by the good. Shazu madreges tzaddik. So when it says in the Chazal are saying, "Filu kol elam kuli emel chot tzaddik ato," is the way the Alter Rebbe means by tzaddik, the personality of the tzaddik, which is not just thought, speech, and action. That his very personality has completely subdued and nullified and voided the negative by the good. That's the level of the tzaddik. That's what you should not believe when people tell you that. In other words, if people say, compliment you and say, look at this person, his thought, speech, and actions. He doesn't ever do or speak or think anything negative. Don't just become overconfident with that, because you're not a tzaddik. A tzaddik has voided, has nullified that. Eliyu be'enov ki'ilu, and then Alter Rebbe is explaining the Gemara. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? You be'enov, you should see yourself ki'ilu muhusi v'asmusha shalara, hu betokfer b'gvarose b'chol lasmoli, kitel dase. In your eyes, rather, you should look at yourself as the deep core of evil, like in the language that he said in chapter 12, Mhusi v'atzmusi of the animal soul, remains with his full inborn and innate strength in the left chamber of the heart. V'lo cholaf v'holach mimenu mu'uma, and it has not budged or been removed or departed whatsoever from the person. So you could say, 1 second, isn't this a little extreme? Why can't a person be a little happy about the fact that they're self-control? This is actually advice to be at your best, not to take for granted. To go back to the example, the king is controlling and governing the city. Don't just rest on your laurels and say, oh, I'm controlling it. Because there's another king waiting in the wings and stating their voice, and the temptation is there, and there's the inadvertent thoughts. So Razal is telling us a tremendous piece of advice. And now that you understand what a Beinoni is, don't just look at the external, remember to keep vigilant and not assume that the negative forces, the negative voice, the selfish voice of the animal soul has been eliminated. So it's really advice to be like, it's like if you give business advice to someone and say, even if you're successful, don't let down your guard. Remain vigilant, and that way you'll succeed even more. If you start convincing yourself that the battle is over and that you've won, when you haven't, it can have tragic consequences. That's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. And then he goes even furthermore. Adrabah. Not only is it at full strength the animal soul, and that's why you have to see yourself kirosha, like a Beinoni, not like a tzaddik, but adrabah, on the contrary. Nischazik geser behemshech hazman. The animal soul gets stronger with the passing of time. Shenishtamish boy harbe. And I skipped 2 words. Let me just go back a moment. Nischazik geser behemshech hazman shenishtamish boy harbe b'achil v'shtiyeh v'sharin yon elam hazeh. It becomes stronger because as time passes, you make more extensive use of the animal soul. In what way? Not necessarily, we're not talking about bad, negative thoughts, speech, or action. Ba'achil v'shtiyeh, simply eating, drinking, v'sharin yonei elam hazeh, and other worldly activities. Because remember, even if a person is not in any way sinning with thought, speech, and action, the animal soul is active. He's eating. We learned in chapter 7 and 8 that the nefesh habamis from klipas nega is involved in things that are taiva shel heter. Not talking about not permissible things. Either eating kosher food, so what is happening? It's like exercising a muscle, and the muscle gets stronger as time passes. So the more a person is in this world, the more the animal soul is more powerful. It doesn't have the power to govern the thought, speech, and action in any negative way, but it's still very powerful, and it gets more powerful. So that's why even more important that the vigilance be there. And that's why, as such, that's why Razal is telling us that even kol ha'elam kulei, em l'chot tzaddik tehoye beinecha kerosha. So you have the answer to chapter 1, the question. It's not a contradiction. Where it says a person should not look at themselves as being a Rosha. The Maimon Chazal that he brought in chapter 1, we said the Al Tehi Rosha b'fnei atzmacha in Ovis, chapter 2. There it says to be a Rosha b'fnei atzmacha. A Rosha, not Kirosha. A Rosha, absolutely not. Because the Beinoni, absolutely, his garments is not a Rosh. It's like a tzaddik. But Kirosha, like a Beinoni, because his faculties are not like a tzaddik. As I said, the second question that he asked, what about the fact that even, okay, so you say, fine, it's Kirosha, but still it can cause some form of depression, that after all your struggles and after all your victories, you're still not a tzaddik. So that he's going to explain in chapter 31 and chapter 34, the answer to that. End of chapter 34. So what you find here is a tremendous way of looking at things. And I can tell you from practical experience, you speak to people, and everyone has their challenges. So you can look at the symptoms, you look at the outer expression, and we said that's critical. Behavioral, whether it's thought, speech, or action, is vital. And if you control that, it's a gewaldige level. It's an unbelievable level. But you want to help people also to work on their insides. What's bringing anything that's happening? So you can control your anger, for example. Like we learned at the end of chapter 12. That a bein is also on yonim bein odem l'chavere. Whether it's anger, whether it's having whether it's jealousy, ill will. So you control that on a thought, speech, and action level. But you also want to know where it's coming from. And the bein, it's still being fed because the animal soul is active. So the Alter Rebbe, Tanya, is explaining that the work is also in looking at yourself introspectively and not becoming, as I said, overconfident and letting down the guard. And that's the power of this whole section that he's talking about here. You also see how a Maimar Chazal, when you read it ostensibly, okay, the point is clear, but every dia, kirosha. And what the meaning, why is the Chazal telling us this statement? The diuk of kirosha, not rosha. And what does it mean, tzaddik? So we have here a Maimar Chazal that comes alive. This is what Pnimis HaTorah does, comes alive in this powerful way in understanding the very personality of us, each one of us. So the takeaway from this is quite clear. It's understanding, number one, that we do have such self-control, and at the same time also understanding the challenges of life. The people that remain humble and understand the challenges are the ones that really succeed. So Alter Rebbe is giving us advice based on this Chazal of how to succeed in all our battles, no matter what they may be. So you have examples as challenge and shalom bayis between husband and wife. And even if you manage it in practical, pragmatic level, always know and be vigilant to make sure that whatever voices that are working within you are still there, and don't become overconfident. This doesn't mean become down and hard on yourself, but to know that there are other voices at work that can always weaken you. And when you're vigilant about that, you'll succeed. Because we said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ezrei, and helps him. So we'll stop here, in the middle of chapter 13. Go to TanyaApplied.com. You can find this program and all previous programs archived, as well as if you'd like to ask any questions. Everyone have a very good tavach and be well.